chosen a variety of things to play for you today, not exclusively Chopin, as we were in October, but now you're going to hear some Mendelssohn, Schumann, and Liszt as well. To introduce this group, this gang of five, you could think of them as Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, Schumann, Clara Schumann, very significant, and Berlioz on the fringe. In the early 1830s, they were all in Paris. They were all in their 20s. The Schumanns lived in Germany, but they were connected through Mendelssohn. So there were trips back and forth, and occasionally at a cafe in Paris, you might find Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, and Friedrich Hiller, another classical pianist, all at the same table, having coffee, gossiping, and having a wonderful time. These are like young college age young men. They're not married yet. They're just starting their careers, and they're full of themselves, and their health is still good, all of them. They're having a wonderful time. And they see one time there's a letter from Hiller. It says they were having coffee, the four of them together, and they saw Kalkbrenner coming. Now Kalkbrenner was a very famous virtuoso pianist and teacher who was, a generation older. He's the one who offered to teach Chopin for 3 years if he would withdraw from the concert stage, and Kalkbrenner would help him finish himself. He'd be fully polished and finished after 3 years. And Chopin actually seriously considered this. He wrote to his father and said, well, is this a good idea? Should I do this? He's really famous. He's a wonderful pianist. Chopin admired him because of his just supernatural calm at the instrument. He just sat quietly and played the most extraordinarily beautiful, technically perfect things. Pearls dropping from his fingers. And this was the kind of technique that Chopin admired, this effortless virtuosity with no outward display of physicality, or acrobatics, pure musical. So Kalkbrenner's coming. He's also very vain. He dresses perfectly. He makes sure he has the most up-to-date hat and cravat and waistcoat and cane, and he's walking, and he's checking out to see who's looking at him in his perfect composure. So this gang of four, Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn, and Hiller, decide they're going to ruffle his feathers. And they go after him on the sidewalk and surround him and talk to him all at once. And he's completely disconcerted and loses his calm and then has to get away. He makes a hasty exit. And they're so pleased with themselves that they've upset him. They've broken the icy calm of his surface. So think of those young men, those college-age young men with no responsibilities, good health, full of themselves, in Paris, playing music for each other and encouraging each other at these early years. They were good colleagues and good friends. The sad thing is that after a few years, after a decade, they had all pretty much become alienated, especially from Liszt. And Liszt was the one who was the most generous, gave away the most money to all kinds of charitable causes and to other musicians throughout his career. But because of personalities which are impossible to repress, there were behaviors and there were incidents and there were things said and there were things written in the newspapers that alienated, and so they fell apart and they were no longer friends. And that's part of the fascinating story, of the behind-the-scenes story of what happened in these years. Four of these people were declared to be the next Mozart. They were incredible child prodigies, and that is Chopin in Poland, Liszt in Hungary, Mendelssohn in Berlin, and Clara Schumann. The other two, Robert Schumann and Berlioz, were catching up. Berlioz's father was a doctor and thought he should go to medical school, and Schumann's father was a literary man. He did translations and wrote poetry and wanted Schumann to go to law school. And when the father died, he stipulated that Schumann would receive no inheritance until he had completed 3 years of law school. So by the age of 20, Schumann's in law school but not attending classes. He's drinking champagne and smoking cigars and spending all his money and has music as a passionate hobby on the side, music and poetry. He was interested in literature as well. Chopin had already written the two concertos, the variations on La Ci Direm La Mano, and the Etudes Opus 10, and a host of other mazurkas and polonaise and other pieces. Liszt was fully launched and had already done European concert tours. Mendelssohn also had been the child prodigy who, for his 15th birthday, his grandmother gave him a hand-copied manuscript of the Bach Passion for St. John. And this so ignited his imagination that he determined that there should be a performance of this complete work. He thought it was a work of incredible beauty and genius. So it took years to organize the Sing Academy in Berlin, but by the age of 20, Mendelssohn had rehearsed a choir and conducted a full-on performance of the St. John Passion. It's unbelievable. I mean, of course, he had money and resources. His family was rich. His grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, was a famous philosopher. The family had money. He had been raised from 0 to 7 with no religion, just as a wealthy Jewish family. But when he was 7, his father had him baptized, and they added Bartholdy to the name to protect his precious children from the anti-Semitism in Germany at that time. And we're talking about the year 1817. So Mendelssohn, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Liszt and Chopin, born in farmhouses in the country, in Poland and in Hungary. Chopin's father was a school teacher, a French teacher who took in boarders, and Chopin's first music teacher wasn't even a pianist, he was a violinist. Liszt, on the other hand, his father was a musician. He had been connected to the court orchestra, Prince Esterhazy's court orchestra in Eisenach. He was also a stock manager on one of the Esterhazy estates. So he had this double job. I think he was a cellist called in occasionally to play in the orchestra, as was the grandfather, and then running the stock and keeping track of the sheep. And when he discovered that his son had a musical talent, prodigious musical talent, he became very, very ambitious, like Leopold Mozart, and pushed and trained, and he knew he was going to make some money, and this boy was going to have a fabulous career. So he dragged him off to Vienna at the age of 11 to study with Karl Czerny. Now, Czerny was a late student of Beethoven, and Beethoven was still living at this time, mostly deaf, but still living. And Czerny was a famous, famous teacher and the author of hundreds of exercises and studies for piano. So they got the money together. They had to really scrape and suffer for Liszt to be in Vienna for 18 months. So that's only from the age of 11 to 12 and a half. And then his father decided, that's enough, he's done. Let's go on tour and make some money. So Franz was on the road from the age of 12. So remember, these 20-year-olds, all in Paris, all at the same time, bumping shoulders with an older generation of musicians. And this was a good time to be in Paris. There had been a revolution in 1830 and a change of government. So now it was the citizen king. And instead of the government being run by the old aristocracy, it was run by the new aristocracy of money, by people like the Rothschilds, who were building the railroads and modernizing France into the age of the Industrial Revolution. So things were calm, and there was money to be spent on culture. And it was a rich, rich time. Chopin, remember, almost left Paris because he couldn't get a start. There were hundreds of pianists trying to make it in Paris. He was considering leaving and going to London, perhaps even to America, when someone introduced him, took him along to a dinner party at the Rothschilds, and Betty Rothschild took a shine to him and said, I would like you to teach my two daughters, and me too, if you're willing. And she set the fee, the astronomically high fee of 20 francs for a lesson, and Chopin was launched into a career of teaching the creme de la creme of the upper aristocracy of money and birth in Paris, and that's how he made his living. In his entire life, he only played about 20 public concerts, whereas Liszt played hundreds and hundreds of public concerts and became a phenomenon. By the 1840s, there was a Listomania sweeping Europe, which was like a rock star, crazy crowds screaming and following him through the streets, women picking up his cigar butts and putting it in a locket and wearing it for years in their bosom. People getting his gloves and his scarves and then tearing them to shreds so everybody could have a little scrap of a souvenir of Franz Liszt. It was insane. And the other musicians, Schumann and Mendelssohn and Chopin, were offended by this because Liszt turned his show into a circus act by their point of view. So here we go. How to start. I've given you a timeline with too much information, but you can read it when you have a quiet moment or if you need a cure for insomnia. So I'd like to take you through this more or less in some kind of order, but first I'll introduce with one piece of Chopin's just to set the tone. Let's do the E major Etude, Opus 10, just the beginning A theme, just so you remember the level of genius that we're talking about. Here we go, the E major Etude. That first series of the 12 Etudes, Opus 10, were dedicated to Liszt. And they played together at various soirees in Paris. They collaborated. They played a Moscheles sonata for four hands. They sight-read pieces together in front of people because they were both so incredibly accomplished. And Chopin always played the secondo, where he sat on the left, where he could control the damper pedals. And Liszt always sat on the right, playing the primo and the upper registers. Mendelssohn made an entrance into this crowd. They collaborated in a huge monster concert organized by Kalkbrenner. Remember Kalkbrenner, who they attacked on the sidewalk and who wanted Chopin to be his student for 3 years. Kalkbrenner really helped Chopin get started in Paris. He organized a concert early in February 32. Chopin had only arrived in Paris in October, the previous fall. And Kalkbrenner wanted to do this monster concert with a piece he had written for 6 pianos. It was a grand march and polonaise. And the 6 pianists were Kalkbrenner, of course, leading, Mendelssohn, Chopin, Hiller, and then 2 others whose names are unfamiliar now, Osborne and Savinsky. Liszt attended the concert and listened, and Kalkbrenner arranged for Chopin to play both the E minor concerto and the variations on La Ci da Rem, La Mano. Chopin was so indebted to Kalkbrenner and so impressed with him that he dedicated the E minor concerto to Kalkbrenner, which is just inconceivable now. I mean, I think later his opinion changed and he didn't worship him to such a high degree. But in the beginning, he so admired his playing and his generosity, and that he helped him get a leg up in Paris on this monster concert. Chopin wasn't making money yet, and he also played at several benefit concerts. One was organized by Berlioz Berlioz was in a on-again, off-again love relationship with an Irish actress named Harriet Smithson, who was famous for her Shakespearean portrayals. And she had broken her leg getting out of her carriage. So she had this broken ankle, broken leg, and she couldn't perform, and her income stopped. So Berlioz organized a benefit concert for her. And who played? Of course, all the pals. Liszt and Chopin came and played a four-hand sonata by Osborne, by George Onslow, and they each, they played other things, and he got actors and singers and poets and all kinds of people to come to do this variety show when they donated their services so that there was enough money for Harriet to live on while she recovered from her broken leg. Well, Chopin writes very proudly to his dad and said, yeah, I played in this big concert in Paris and I played with Liszt and all this stuff. And his father said, yes, but you didn't make any money. I'm still supporting you. We're in Poland. We're under Russian occupation. Things are a little tough here. I mean, we can put bread on the table, but it's not easy. When are you going to start making some money? So this put a little pressure on Chopin to start behaving more like an adult and become self-sufficient. And fortunately, that's when the teaching started to kick in. He was taken to a festival in Aachen, the Lower Rhine Music Festival. This was a huge deal. He took a time out from teaching to go up there with Hiller, and they bumped into Mendelssohn. They went to the opera house to hear a Handel opera. And as they were coming down the stairs, Mendelssohn was coming up. It was just a chance meeting, and they were overjoyed to see each other again. Have a nice account of this from a letter that Hiller wrote, and then Chopin put a postscript at the bottom of it. Let me just find that for you. It shows how sunny, how ebullient, and the level of excitement of these guys, these young guys on their own, getting out into the world and meeting each other to make music and then to compare, well, what have you written lately? So here's the letter. They all met after the opera, after they met Mendelssohn that day. The next day they found a piano and they played for each other. Mendelssohn writes, Chopin had cut his lessons to come out with Hiller, so we met up and played. They have both improved in execution, and as a piano player, Chopin is now one of the very finest, quite a second Paganini, doing all sorts of wonderful things that one never thought could be done. As they left, Hiller wrote a letter to his mother saying, I'm on board the steamer, we're headed for Cologne, da-da-da, and Chopin added a postscript to this letter. Gracious lady, today I am like the steam from our boat, which vanishes into thin air. I feel as if one part of me were floating away to my homeland, while the other comes to you to greet you respectfully in Paris and presents its compliments. Your servant, Chopin. This is just, it's so much fun. They're just having a wonderful time. It's like a spring break trip for them again. Mendelssohn was big in doing oratorios and orchestral works and symphonies, but he also was churning out piano pieces called Songs Without Words. And these are deliciously accessible piano pieces to feed the growing market of piano players in Europe. There will be thousands and thousands of mostly young women now studying piano and playing, and Mendelssohn was happy to oblige. So here's one of the very loveliest ones. This is Song Without Words in A flat, Opus 38, and it's entitled Duetto. And if you listen, there is a soprano melody and a baritone melody, and they talk back and forth. It's a dialogue, and then after the first verse or so, they sing together in a unison. So you can hear it almost as a kind of vocal duet with arpeggiated piano accompaniment coming around it. So here, Mendelssohn. Chopin played for him too. He played some etudes, and he played a brand new nocturne, probably the D flat major nocturne, Opus 27, which I'll just play the beginning of to remind you how that goes. Chopin and Mendelssohn, remember, were going to be the next Mozart. Well, when Mendelssohn heard this nocturne, he loved it so much, he asked Chopin to play it again, and he memorized it in 2 hours so that he could play it for his brother Paul. That's what kind of an ear these guys had. Just phenomenal musicianship and natural talent combined. Also training. They could transpose, they could, improvise. Mendelssohn was a conductor, a composer, and a pianist, as was Schumann, a conductor, composer, and pianist, as was Liszt. Chopin is the exception. He concentrated on the piano. He did not want to write orchestral music, and he did not want to conduct or be out even in public very much. He was a very private person. So here's a little bit of Chopin. Probably played the A flat major Etude, the Opus 25 Aeolian harp, and he played that for the Schumanns as well. So I'll play a bit of that for you. And the D flat major nocturne, which Mendelssohn memorized after hearing it twice. Bring in the Schumanns now. They met sort of by accident. Again, Chopin is traveling, and Schumann had been an admirer of his for years. He had written a big review of the variations La Ci Darem la Mano in 1834. And Clara was playing these pieces. She got it when she was 12 years old. She learned it in 2 weeks and said, it's the hardest piece I've ever learned in my whole life. Which is just, again, it just, the level of these people is just supernatural. This 12-year-old could learn and memorize the variations for piano and orchestra on La Ci Darem la Mano, which you heard me play a bit of in the fall. It's just dazzling virtuosity and talent at a prodigious age. Schumann let's see, there's a wonderful letter I wanted to read you of a response to hearing Chopin play when they had met. And also, Schumann wrote the review, the initial review, and his future father-in-law, Friedrich Wieck, who was the piano teacher, also wrote a review which put Mozart over the edge and falling on the floor laughing, because what he did was turn it into a huge piece of program music where he identified all the characters in Don Giovanni. And in this variation, they're chasing each other around. And in this variation, Mazzetto is trying to catch Zerlina and Don Giovanni. And in the Adagio, Don Giovanni kisses Zerlina on the D flat. Chopin says, where is her D flat? You know, this was ridiculous. He thought it was just silly, stupid stuff. So he never responded to any of it, because Chopin was not about program music. He was about absolute music. And here's Schumann, this manic depressive, wildly talented but troubled person. And he meets Chopin, and he's dazzled. He's dazzled and he's enthusiastic. And Chopin played for him the Aeolian harp Etude, and Clara played some of her own compositions, and a sonata that Schumann had written and dedicated to her and to Chopin Etudes. And Chopin was so impressed with her, he said, she is the only woman in Germany who knows how to play my music. Schumann wrote, after they had played, and Schumann also played the newly composed Ballade in G minor, which must have been just overwhelmingly a dazzling display to hear Chopin play this thing himself for them, just for the family and Clara and Friedrich Wieck, followed by a host of studies, mazurkas and nocturnes, everything unparalleled. And then he performed the sonata, the study in A flat, the little Aeolian harp one I just gave the first page of for you. He writes, imagine an Aeolian harp that had all the scales, and that these were jumbled together by the hand of an artist into all sorts of fantastic ornaments, but in such a manner that a deeper fundamental tone and a softly singing higher part were always audible. And you have an approximate idea of his playing. No wonder that we've become fondest of those pieces that we heard him play himself. And therefore we shall mention first of all the one in A flat, which is rather a poem than a study. It would be a mistake, however, to think that he brought out every one of the little notes distinctly. It was more like a billowing of the A flat major chord, swelling from time to time by means of the pedal. But in the midst of the harmony were heard the sustained tones of a wondrous tenor voice, which came into greater prominence to join the principal cantilena. Dazzling, and such joy and such generosity and appreciation of this. Chopin also went and played at the house of an acquaintance of theirs, and she recorded the visit and said, Chopin was here yesterday and he played on my piano for half an hour. He improvised and he played his new etudes. He's an interesting person whose playing captures the listener with a sensitive ear. And I indeed listened with bated breath. The lightness with which those velvet fingers glide, or rather flit, across the keyboard is astonishing. He captivated me, I cannot deny it, in a way that I have never known before. What enchanted me most was the freedom of both his bearing and his playing. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, Schumann, poor manic depressive Schumann, came from a family with a history of mental illness. He had a sister who had committed suicide and a cousin. His mother was suffering from chronic depression, and his father had huge mood swings. Schumann himself recorded his first powerful episode of these mood swings when he was 18 years old. In his student years, he described the beginning of what he called the first episode of my madness, and he was always afraid that he would lose his mind. And of course, eventually he did, and he was afraid he would become a danger, that he might actually hurt Clara or their children. So he attempted suicide, on a freezing day in March of '54, and some fishermen saw him. He threw himself in the river. They fished him out and took him to the insane asylum, where he spent the last 2 years of his life, and where Clara didn't see him at all until just before he died. But he had a dazzling swing, you know, of soaring on the heights of manic energy and inspiration, and then down into the depths of terrible depressions. Here's his own words when he was 18 years old. "My heart pounds sickeningly and I turn pale. Often I feel as if I were dead. I seem to be losing my mind. I did have my mind, but I thought I had lost it. I had actually gone mad. If you know how my mind is always working and how my symphonies would have reached Opus 100 if I had but written them down. Sometimes I'm so full of music and so overflowing with melody that I find it simply impossible to write down anything." This is a man who's really helpless in the grip of an illness. And if you're interested to pursue this, there are 2 wonderful books I can recommend about manic depressive order in artists. They're written by Kay Redfield Jameson, who wrote An Unquiet Mind a few years ago, which is her biographical account of her own struggle with bipolar disorder. She's a PhD doctor of psychology. It's a moving and brilliant portrayal. And then she wrote Touched with Fire. And she has studied the histories of various artists, writers, poets, musicians, all kinds of people who have this same manic depressive illness, and the glorious highs and the suffocating cold lows that they deal with. And of course their poor families have to deal with this. Now, Clara was 9 years younger than Schumann. He met her when she was a 9-year-old prim little prodigy, darling child of her father. He was grooming her to be the concert pianist. He was ambitious for her. The last thing her father wanted her to do was marry this dropout from law school musician with a family history of mental illness who drank too much and had wrecked his hand with some kind of cockamamie mechanism to pull the fingers way, way, way back to the back of the hand. He was trying to strengthen his fingers, and he practiced obsessively, too many hours and too much repetition, and he crippled his hands. So that ended his possible career as a pianist, and that's when he turned to composition. And he and Clara fell in love, wanted to marry, and her father took it to court, and they fought him in the court for 2 or 3 years until finally she became of age to marry, and they married the day before her 21st birthday. They finally, when she became to her legal age, they could marry. And 1840 was Schumann's year of song. He wrote 160 songs in 1 year, and one of those songs was a wedding present for Clara on a poem of Ruckert. Now, this is so touching, such a beautiful song, and my husband Bob and I would like to perform that for you in its simple original version as Schumann wrote it for Clara, and then I'll show you what Liszt did to it. This is part of the reason that Friends fell apart, because of what Liszt did to their music. So first, Widmung is this dedication from the Myrtenlieder.
Thou art my soul, thou art my heart, thou art both my joy and sadness. Thou art my world, the heaven wherein I dwell, the resting place I cast all my past sorrows. Thou art my rest, my peace, make me worthy of thy love. Thou art my guardian, my better self.
What a wedding present.
Meine Seele, du mein Herz, du meine Wonne, du mein Schmerz, du meine Welt, in der ich lebe, meine Himmel, du, daran ich lebe.
Did you hear the quotation of the Schubert Ave Maria in the coda to that song? That was a wedding present for German Catholic bride. Now, poor poor Schumann. Franz Liszt took this song. He liked it too. Everybody liked it. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. He took it and he gave it the Franz Liszt makeover, which Schumann, Clara, and Robert really were uncomfortable with. Clara detested Liszt and what he did to Robert's music. She thought this was vulgar, empty virtuosity with no point, and it ruins Robert's song. It's kind of, giving it the Las Vegas treatment with some neon and sequins and razzle dazzle for no reason. So I'll play you the end of the Liszt transcription of that. You see what you think. I'll transition from the part "You Are, My Angel." There's the floating the angel part, and then it goes into the big finish. think? Did Clara have reason to be annoyed with her wedding song? That Liszt would do that to it. Chopin too, it really annoyed with Liszt because even though he played Chopin's music, the Etudes, he learned the Etudes in 2 weeks, or Opus 10, and played them with more force and vigor than Chopin could. And he said, God, I feel jealous. I wish I could play the way he plays my own pieces. But he couldn't resist tampering and adding things, adding little cadenzas and little flourishes and arpeggios, kind of giving it the Liberace treatment. So that's what he did to Wiedemann. We'll do another one later. I'll show you what else he did to Mendelssohn. After this visit, where they had all this Worman playing in this self-admiration society, Schumann dedicated a major work to Chopin. It was the Kreisleriana, which is a piece of 8 short. No, I've got the wrong piece. It's the Carnival. I'm mixing myself up. He dedicated the Kreisleriana, but in Carnival, which is a set of 21 short portraits, it's like a portrait gallery of characters at Carnival, at Mardi Gras. The last big festival before Lent, where people wear masks, and there were 21 of these short portraits, including 2 portraits of Schumann's own split personality. He, as the editor of a famous music journal, which he founded, this Neue Zeitschrift für Musik in Leipzig, where he wrote reviews and promoted new music, he openly expressed this split personality. So he had a Eusebius, which was the dreamy, poetic, kind of lost, head in the fog in the clouds person, and then Florestan, who's impulsive and erratic. So there's kind of a yin-yang of personalities, and they're both represented in Carnival, as well as there's a short movement entitled Chopin. And it's the very first time in music that someone tried to imitate Chopin's style. See what you think. We'll do a little bit of Eusebius, then I'll play all of Florestan and all of Chopin. And these are very short. They take like a minute or less. These are short little movements. pretty lovely tribute to Chopin, but put him in an awkward position because now Schumann had written all these complimentary reviews in print and dedicated Kreisleriana to him, which is a major work, 8 big movements of manic depressive episodes flying back and forth, but dedicated to my friend, Mr. Frédéric Chopin. And in response, Chopin dedicated the second ballade, the F major ballade, to Schumann, which he had started just before he and George Sand went to Mallorca, and then he wrote an ending. He finished it in Mallorca. I think this might be the time, Leslie, for us to show the gallery of photos. I have just a few pictures to show you of gallery portraits of our gang of 5, and I have the cover page of this original edition of the Kreisleriana, which Schumann dedicated to Chopin in huge font. He put Chopin's name in bigger font than his own name on the title page of this piece. And Chopin didn't respond. I think he thought the music was strange and disjointed, and all he had to say was, that's a really attractive title page, which is so painful that he couldn't reciprocate. But that was consistent for him all the way through his life. He didn't really admire the music of Mendelssohn. It was too conservative and too square and tame, and the music of Schumann was just kind of incomprehensible, torn apart fragments, obsessive manic stuff. Liszt was too vulgar and too banal. Berlioz was just incomprehensible and not very polished. So he held himself to such a high standard. Now, it's hard to hold that against him because he also held it against himself. When he died, there was a huge portfolio of unpublished pieces and fragments and sketches that he gave clear instructions 3 times: burn this when I'm gone. And it included several waltzes, several popular ones, mazurkas, and the fantasy Impromptu, which he had written in the 1830s. And the more I think about it, the more I think that the fantasy Impromptu, he did the right thing, because it's not up to the standard of his other pieces. And the main reason is because that central episode, that theme that everybody loves, that was turned into I'm always chasing rainbows, that theme is too banal. It sounds a little too much like, you know who, Liszt. First off will be Chopin, the beautiful watercolor portrait done by his then fiancée when she was only 16. This is one of the most beautiful, I think, and best captures this thoughtful, sensitive, reserved, very self-composed young man at the age of 25. Okay, and then next, now we get the gallery, the gang. Liszt, of course, who had the biggest influence on Europe and was an overpowering presence in music in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Schumann, poor manic depressive Schumann, and Clara. This is a portrait of Clara on her 20th birthday. Poor Clara stuck it out with Schumann until he died, finally in 1856, when she was pregnant with her 8th child. Imagine, and then she had to return to the concert stage to support her family. So she made sure that the kids were quiet, and he had a quiet room he could work in. Incredible obstacles, and yet she tried to compose and keep up her own playing. Mendelssohn, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, the boy genius, the prodigy who had written, the violin concerto and the Italian symphony and the Hebrides overture and the music for Midsummer Night's Dream when he was a teenager, and revived single-handedly the start of the Bach revival in Germany with that performance of the St. John Passion. when he was 20 years old. Also stunning conductor, and founded the Leipzig Conservatoire. So Leipzig, where Schumann and Mendelssohn were, was a center of conservative music taste. Berlioz was a wild man in Paris, and he and Liszt were friends, and they were advocating the music of the future, whatever that would be. But it was wild and free, and they were willing to try all kinds of things. Okay, and you can see where the expression long hair, that's long-haired music. Liszt was especially canny in his use of his long hair to toss it around when he played. He was great on keyboard gestures and almost acrobatics while he's playing to communicate every single thing you should be feeling when he's playing his piece. Okay, let's go on. Next is, that's an actual photograph of Clara and Robert Schumann. Interesting. Of course, the woman subservient and the muse of her adoring husband. Okay, next. That's the original title page of the Chrysleriana. Chrysler is a character in E.T.A. Hoffmann's story who's a bipolar, manic-depressive, wild character. So Chrysleriana are 8 movements that are depressing the crazy, erratic mood swings and different personalities of this character. Fantasies for pianoforte, Seinem Freunde, my friend, Mr. F. Chopin. Look at that in that bold, big font, dedicated by Robert Schumann. In gray, little smaller font. He's so modest. Nice cover. Look at the nice little graphics at the top. There's a man at maybe a keyboard, maybe just a desk, or I can't quite tell what that is. Looks like a music desk, surrounded by angels and demons and muses and swans and all kinds of fanciful stuff. Okay, next one. Mendelssohn and the beautiful Cécile Jean Reno that he married. They had 5 lovely children, all homeschooled. Was a very happy marriage. But when Felix's sister, Fanny, suddenly died, he crash-dived into depression and then died of a stroke a short time later. He was only 47 years old. So that left Leipzig without a conductor, a director of a conservatoire, and the composer, the most popular composer in England. Queen Victoria loved his pieces. He made 10 trips to London. It was a huge part of his career, going to London to conduct his oratorios and play and promote his music. Okay. And next, after Felix and Cécile, oh yes, Georges and Marie. So this is Chopin's partner for 9 years, the most notorious woman in Europe, the author Georges Sand, or Roland Dudevant, and Liszt's partner for only 5 years, Marie Dagout, who was the mother of his 3 children. But then they had a nasty split and a nasty custody battle. And Liszt sued her for custody of the children, which he could get because none of them had been born in France. And he was listed as the father, and she never really listed her full legal name on the birth certificate because she was married. She had a previous husband and a previous child. So he gets custody of the children. I'm telling you this to again show you why people become alienated from Liszt, besides what he does to their music. He gets custody of the children, and then he installs them with his mother, Anna Liszt, in Paris. And he sends her an income, steady installments of checks for their education and their well-being, and he doesn't see them for 9 years. Dysfunctional family there. Okay, so Marie and Georges had been best friends, but then there was some mutual jealousy there. I think Marie also had a crush on Chopin, and there's a wonderful quote from a letter she wrote to a friend. This is well after she's with Liszt. In 38, fall of 38. Now that's just at the time that Sand and Chopin are leaving Paris for Mallorca, and they're going to be out of town for almost a year. They go to Mallorca, it's a disaster, and then they go to Marseille, and then they end up in Nohant for the whole summer while he recovers his health because he almost died. But Marie was not pleased about them getting together. And she wrote to a friend, c'est le seul pianiste que je puisse entendre avec non seulement sans ennui, mais avec un profond recueillement. Chopin, is the only pianist I can listen to, not only without boredom, but with a profound contemplation. Ouch, assuming Liszt never saw these words. And then, of course, Georges and Marie they were both authors, and they both wrote novels under male pseudonyms. They both smoked cigars, and they were both 6 years older than their Eastern European exotic lovers. I mean, there's just so many parallels there. It's very striking. Okay, next picture after Georges and Marie. There we go. This is a character drawn by Maurice, is Georges' son by her husband, when he was only 7 years old. Liszt and Marie were frequent visitors to Nohant. She had an Erard piano there for him. I love the giant mouse hole in the bottom, or maybe it's a rat hole. And Liszt with the long hair and the gesticulations, and Sen smoking probably one of her opium cigarettes. Okay, next one. And another character later. Now Maurice is all of 12 years old. Chopin is giving a lesson to Pauline Viardot, who is a very famous singer, occasional student of his, who toured Europe, was brilliant singer, saying, "Ça, c'est le jeu d'un listy. Il n'en faut pas pour accompagner la voix." That is a listy trick. Never, ever do that when you're accompanying the voice. So obviously she had absorbed some mannerisms of Liszt, or perhaps had been coached by him, and he's saying, don't do that. Don't ever, ever do that. Okay, and next, is that it, or we got one more? Oh yes, photographs of Liszt, the earliest known photograph, always showing his beautiful profile. Liszt was the one who created the modern piano concert by turning the piano sideways so that the lid is reflecting the sound out, and the audience can see the artist in profile and see the keyboard, because previously pianists played with their back to the audience. This was something new. He was also the first one to play recitals completely of his own works and from memory. So this set the bar very high. A lot of his own works that he played, though, was kind of trashy, fantasies on opera themes and potpourris of current popular melodies from various operas or national folk tunes, like the Hungarian Rhapsodies, which are really not original. A lot of the tunes are not original with him, but they were just tunes that he heard in Hungary that the gypsies were playing, but they were written by they're written by a real composer who published his music in Hungary. And so Liszt just borrowed the melodies and made these Hungarian Rhapsody fantasies. So big career. Very tall, very slim, and also very sickly as a child. Surprisingly, like Chopin, his parents thought he was going to die. 3 times they even bought a coffin. One time they thought that was the end of him, but he came back and he had a stunning career as this creature of the stage, and turning the stage into a circus show, actually. Mendelssohn and Cécile, Mendelssohn and Chopin had quite a congenial relationship, even though Chopin did not admire his music. Mendelssohn asked him to write out a mazurka for Cécile for a Christmas present, because he said, yours is the music that she loves the best. What a compliment, and so humble to say that your wife prefers Chopin's music to all others. It's a little bit like the letter that Marie Dagout wrote. He's the only pianist I can listen to without becoming bored. So Chopin had a magical quality. And Chopin did copy out this mazurka, but he didn't deliver it. He didn't mail it to Cécile until the following October. So it got there almost a year late. But it's lovely. And it shows the inventive, every time something is repeated, there are lovely changes of harmony, changes of rhythmic placement in the bass line, changes of ornamentation in the right hand, and towards the end, this incredible modulating sequence that chromatically slides down, but in the most surprising way, which is a foreshadow of where harmony was going in those years. So I wonder what Mendelssohn probably thought that was too far. He wrote somewhere else that he thought, Chopin's music is nice, but occasionally he slips into these bizarre, dissonant modulations, which are just hurt the ears. So I think, in a way, Chopin put that in there to just say, it's a little poke with a stick. See how you like this. So delicious. It's just fun to play, but it's delightful and continuously changing. When Mendelssohn died, suddenly of that stroke, Schumann wrote another tribute piece, a short piece from the album for the young called Remembrance, in honor of Mendelssohn, his friend. And he did it in the style of Mendelssohn, somewhat like the little Chopin piece that was in Carnival in the style of Chopin. So here is Remembrance by Schumann. Schumann dedicated the Kreisleriana, and Chopin responded by dedicating the second ballade. And the second ballade is the most bipolar piece that I think Chopin ever wrote, and it's a stunningly appropriate piece to dedicate to Schumann. So I'd like to play you the opening 2 episodes of that, so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about here. This is the ballade that was finished in Mallorca with a new ending. But I won't get that far. I'm just going to play the opening, which is the Eusebius, the calm part. And then it erupts into this crazy, angry, wild, stormy episode, which would be the Florestan part. And of course, Chopin never explicitly put a program on any of his music, not any of it. But it is stunningly appropriate in this case. you should hear the ending. The ending is wild. It's just, it kind of goes berserk, as if someone's just losing control. And then again, that quiet theme comes back at the very end as a short coda. So listen to the whole thing. Make that your listening assignment this week. Listen to, I dare you, Kreisleriana. And I put a link to the Moshel's Sonata for Four Hands that Chopin and Liszt played. There's a nice recording of, I think, 2 Hungarian girls from the Hungarian Music Academy playing the first movement, which is nice. It gives you an idea. And it wasn't hard music. This was sight-readable music for these 2 guys. Liszt, the last thing he wrote, he'd become estranged from everybody, from Chopin, from Mendelssohn, from his children. When Chopin died, within 2 weeks of the funeral, he wrote this intrusive letter to Chopin's sister saying, I'm planning to write a little something, a tribute, just a little paper, a little document. If you could answer these questions, like 15 nosy, intrusive questions, which the sister just passed the letter to Jane Sterling and said, can you deal with this? And Jane very patiently answered the questions. Liszt didn't use any of the material because there's serious doubt that he even wrote this thing, because his new partner, lady partner, was also an authoress who had great pretensions to writing. And she wrote these long, gassy paragraphs about everything except Chopin. So if you read the Liszt book, it's terrible. You won't find Chopin in there. What you'll find is someone talking about themselves and Polish aristocracy and mazurkas and just all kinds of stuff. But there's the best thing about this book was the introduction, which had a letter from another friend of Liszt who was trying to assuage his hurt feelings, because in print, this person had compared Chopin and Liszt and put Chopin higher. And he knew Liszt's feelings were hurt. And so he wrote a letter trying to make him feel better and say, look, you shouldn't feel bad. I won't affront you, I won't insult you by retracting what I said. Since I wrote it, I thought it. But here's why. In the arts, it seems to me, first place belongs to unity, to that which is complete. I believe Chopin to be complete. Performance and composition. Everything in him is in harmony and equal value. Chopin has reached the realization of his ideal. You, on the contrary, and I have heard you say this, are only halfway in your development. The pianist has arrived, but the composer is perhaps delayed. I tell you this, and I sincerely believe it, the day when the inward Liszt comes out, the day when that amazing power of execution has its counterpart and its complement equally in composition, and that day is perhaps not far off, for men like you do grow, on that day you will not be called the first pianist of Europe. You will be called by another name. Please bear me no grudge. So Liszt and Chopin, they had this kind of, there was mutual admiration and resentment and competition, and Chopin destroyed. He gave orders, destroy everything. 3 times he said, burn everything, and they didn't. And he held back pieces like the Fantasy Impromptu. Liszt, on the other hand, never wrote down a piece that he didn't like and keep. So there's thousands of pieces that he wrote, and a lot of it is really trash. I'm sorry, especially the early stuff. It's just not worth the effort to work it, to learn on. And Chopin's, gets the final word saying about when at the height of the Listomania, he says, that one of these days, Liszt, he goes too far. He's going to be either a member of parliament or perhaps even the king of Abyssinia or the Congo. But as regards the themes of his compositions, well, they'll remain buried with the newspapers. And by buried, I think he means buried with the trash in the landfill. So think of the melodies that we've heard today, the beautiful melody of the Etude in E major, the Mendelssohn melody, the Schumann melody, all these lovely things. And then Liszt's most famous piano piece that survives to this day is the Liebherr Strom. Listen to the melody of Liebherr Strom. And of course, I'm prejudiced. So I'll make it sound worse than it really is. But that's part of the fun. Come on. Okay, but here it is. Okay, I'll play it for you anyway, and then we'll stop there. Whew, okay, I made it through. Probably. Next week, come back. We're going to talk about how Chopin influenced piano playing and through his teaching and through his performance, and how it was so different from everyone else at the time, especially the Flying Trapeze Circus School of Liszt and all those people. So I hope you come back. There'll be a lot more musical examples and images, and I hope you'll learn something new next week. Thank you all so much for sharing this hour and a half with me. It's been a pleasure. Hope to see you again next week.